Tonight, we begin with a development that Pentagon officials had feared, warned about, and quietly prepared for. A move that unfolded not over weeks, but in hours. Hours that changed the calculus of this war. Hours that forced NATO's hand. Hours that brought the world closer to a threshold no one wants to cross. What Vladimir Putin did today crossed a line that Western leaders had hoped would hold. And when that line broke, NATO did not hesitate. They responded with speed, precision, and unmistakable resolve. For months now, there had been signals, not official statements, not formal diplomatic notes, just signals that Russia was preparing something unprecedented. Putin has been aggressive, yes, but he has been calculated in his aggression. His moves have followed a certain rhythm, a pattern, almost a predictability. But what set off alarm bells in Washington this morning was that the pattern went silent. Intelligence analysts who monitor Russian nuclear posture know the indicators. The communication bursts between command centers, the movement of mobile launchers, the activity at strategic submarine bases, the sudden silence before repositioning. All of that went quiet. And whenever Putin goes quiet, it means something is about to get loud. Early this morning, satellite reconnaissance detected what officials described as significant repositioning of strategic nuclear assets, including mobile ICBM launchers that had not been moved from garrison in over 18 months. These are the kinds of assets that Russia only deploys when they are signaling something very specific: deterrence, escalation, or preparation for potential use. Western intelligence didn't know which category this fell into or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that Putin was changing his nuclear posture. And when a nuclear-armed state shifts posture without explanation, even by small degrees, the Pentagon pays attention. The alert issued by the Pentagon tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Officials, after emergency briefings, described Putin's move as dangerous, destabilizing, and perhaps most importantly, inconsistent with any defensive rationale. But nuclear signaling only works if the target hesitates. NATO did not. In fact, their response today was among the most coordinated we've seen since the war began. Here's what we know. Within hours of detecting Russia's repositioning, NATO activated emergency response protocols. These weren't the standard readiness adjustments. These were enhanced deterrence measures, assets, and capabilities that NATO only deploys when preparing for potential escalation. Tonight, multiple sources confirmed that Ukraine launched precision strikes on Russian military infrastructure, including a command facility in occupied Crimea that had recently been reinforced for what analysts believe was nuclear coordination purposes. Ukraine struck before Russia could disperse additional assets. They hit communication nodes. They hit logistics hubs. They hit staging areas that were likely preparing to support the repositioning. In other words, Ukraine targeted the infrastructure backbone, the components that would have made Putin's gamble operational. This is what made the Pentagon's warning so urgent. Russia's move wasn't just symbolic, it was actionable. It represented the kind of escalation that could spiral if left unchecked. And Ukraine, understanding that fully, responded with force. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't strike population centers. They didn't target political facilities. They hit military infrastructure. They hit command networks. And here's where the story becomes even more significant. Analysts now believe that Putin's latest move was designed to test the cohesion of NATO after months of political transition in Washington. Putin wanted to see whether the alliance would fracture under pressure. But instead, the opposite happened. NATO didn't hesitate. They issued a unified response that was so swift, so unambiguous, that even Moscow noticed. You don't get the Kremlin's attention easily. But today, the alliance did. Defense officials, speaking under anonymity, described Putin's shift as coercive signaling, a way to extract concessions through fear. But NATO proved today that they remain both vigilant and unified. As reports continued coming in throughout the evening, we learned more about the scale of the response. American strategic assets increased readiness levels, forcing Russian planners to recalculate. European NATO members activated rapid response units that had been on standby. Ukrainian forces operating in Crimea reportedly struck secondary targets used by Russia for strategic communications. This wasn't just deterrence. This wasn't just messaging. This was coordinated pressure. This was strategic denial. And strategic denial is the one thing Putin has struggled to overcome since the invasion began. Remember, Putin thought the West would fracture. He thought nuclear threats would paralyze decision-making. He thought Ukraine would collapse within weeks. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. The alliance is holding, Ukraine is striking back, and Russia is recalculating. What makes this moment so dangerous and so revealing is that Putin's latest move happened when he is under extraordinary internal pressure. Military hardliners want escalation. Economic advisors want negotiation. Security services want stability. Nationalist factions want victory at any cost. Putin is balancing these demands while losing ground in Ukraine. And when leaders in that position make sudden moves, they're not doing it from strength. They're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from vulnerability. The Pentagon's alert, now shared with NATO allies, was designed to signal that the United States is not willing to allow nuclear coercion to succeed. Officials said plainly that Russia's actions were inconsistent with responsible nuclear state behavior. That is diplomatic language for, we see what you're doing, and we will not back down. Meanwhile, President Zelensky addressed the Ukrainian people in a calm, resolute speech tonight. He said, "We do not seek escalation, but we will not accept intimidation." He said, "Every threat only strengthens our resolve." And he said, "The world is watching, and Ukraine will not blink." As the night continues, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly Putin hoped to achieve. But what we do know is that the Pentagon's response was timely. It reassured allies, it signaled resolve, and it denied Putin the reaction he wanted. And tonight, for the first time in months, the Kremlin appears to be reassessing. Moscow is quiet, too quiet. And when Putin is quiet, it means he is recalculating. Because tonight, Putin learned something again. Nuclear threats will not break NATO. Ukraine will not surrender. And the West is paying attention. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. The line held, the alliance held, and the response was unmistakable. And we will be here watching every detail as the next phase unfolds.